I used to be in paid Christian ministry and was a lecturer in biblical theology, training people to teach the Bible. And then I got sick and became a writer. And I've got a popular blog. I've written a short book called Coming Back to God When You Feel Empty. And I'm on the edits of my second book on the theme of waiting.
You've been chronically ill with ME for over a decade now. So can you tell us a little bit about the impact that being ill has on your everyday life?
Okay, so the trajectory of my illness has gradually been worsening. So I originally had it after glandular fever in sixth form, which is about 20 years ago now. And 10 years ago, it affected my mobility and I started needing to use a wheelchair. And 7 years ago, I became housebound and needing to be in bed like this 21 hours a day. So what does it look like on the everyday? I have to measure out my life in teaspoons. So I'm like the opposite of a Duracell bunny. So I have a really bad inner battery that runs down very fast and never charges fully again. So I can't walk, for example, more than a few meters before my legs collapse. Leaving the house, even in a wheelchair, is such a high level activity for me that I can only do it once a fortnight for a couple of hours. So it's a little bit like being on house arrest, like Paul. He was saintly, so I'm very much like Paul. And then when the pain comes, just having to wait it out. So yeah, I miss things. I miss things like going around to a friend's house for dinner, walking alongside my husband rather than being pushed by him. Being able to do stuff with my son, go to his parents' evenings, play with him in the park. I miss the things I used to do, like running, singing, playing piano, cooking a meal. I miss going to church. It's a bit awkward being the vicar's wife who doesn't go to church. Most of all, I miss my freedom and my independence. It's just hard being reliant on others.
They're all huge, huge things. And I'm just wondering what the impact of such kind of intense and long-lasting pain and struggle has been on your faith.
Well, before I was this ill, I was a Bible teacher, and so I could lecture quite happily in suffering and God and how it all fitted together. But when you are going through something yourself, you can know theology, but there's heart theology. And for me, the thing that was most hard was because there is this Christian myth that when you're suffering, God is somehow more present or closer to you, or you become more holy in some way, and that kind of justifies the amount of suffering. And so I felt very awkward about the fact that when I was going through the hardest time of my life, God was silent. I was pretty unholy. It's really hard to be anything but angry and irritable when you're in a lot of pain. It's just hard. And so I was kind of like going, I don't know what's going to happen to me. And I want God to be here, but God is silent. And what do I do with that? And it was worse. Just the worst point was just after I gave birth. So it was going through labour that kind of pushed my ME into the very severe state. And so after I gave birth, I woke up with a new baby and a new disability. I couldn't walk. I couldn't even stand in the early days. I couldn't pick up my baby. I couldn't change his nappy. So for months I was in bed, just looking up at the ceiling, too exhausted to speak to anyone for more than 30 minutes per day, just having my baby to feed. And then hour after hour, looking up at this beige ceiling, the same color every day, nothing to do, just this endless time going on and on. And I was like, I don't know if I can do this. I just don't know if I can survive this. And I had this newborn baby who I loved and would have done anything for. And something in me snapped. And I said to God, if I had the power to stop my baby suffering from the way I am now suffering, I would do it. And you have the power and you're not. How are you my parent? How are you demonstrating love for me in this? And I'm not the kind to suffer in silence. So I got mad at God, and I raged, I wrestled, and I ranted at people. And I think I'm still in that process of wrestling in many ways. But there are two things that really helped. And the first was looking at the Bible again with this fresh perspective, and discovering there are so many heroes of God who wrestled similarly, who really, really struggled in their faith or with suffering. And the fact that so many pages are devoted to that in the Bible gives me hope. It gives me permission to say, I'm not okay with this. And God, I am going to you with the questions, because this doesn't add up. So I think having permission in that space was huge. And as Christians, we often underestimate the length of time it takes to be able to process and cope with a loss or suffering like this. And so if we rush too quickly to the, hey, just trust God, then we fail Christians. And I think there are a lot of people who walk away from the faith just because they have no space for that in between, the meant that we see so much of in the Psalms and in Job. And the second thing that really helped me was I was listening to Kay Warren talk about her son's suicide. I don't know if you heard the talk. It was really good. And at one point she says, suffering will come because suffering will come because suffering will come. You can't escape suffering. You can't wish it away. So do you want, in that midst of suffering, do you want to be with God, or do you want to do it without God? And for me, that was the choice. I wanted God to fix things, but in the face of him not fixing things, I had to say, okay, am I going to do this alone, or am I going to do this with God? And I felt just like the disciples who say, well, where do we go? You have the words of eternal life. I've got to do this with you. And that's, what else can you do?
Yeah, like you've said already, healing happens sometimes and doesn't happen other times. For those who haven't experienced full physical healing, what kind of things have worked for you, and what would you recommend they think about?
Yeah, this is such an interesting topic, because I'm kind of a walking, living example of the paradox. So when I was 6 days old, I was rushed to Great Ormond Street Hospital. My parents weren't Christians. I had a brain hemorrhage. The doctors were saying it looks like she's going to die. If she survives, she'll be incredibly disabled. She'll never learn to read or write. All we can suggest is praying. And so my non-Christian parents prayed with a nurse. And the next day, the scans were clear. I was completely better. And even the doctors were saying, this is what we call in the trade a miracle. They had no explanation for it. So I always grew up with that knowledge that God can heal, and that he loved me, and yet he doesn't heal me now of this. So I've had that example of a miracle. I am a miracle, but I'm also living with that journey of when God doesn't heal. And that's the paradox. God can, and sometimes he does. Not very often. That's why they're known as miracles. But sometimes he does, and it's worth asking. But sometimes he doesn't. And what do you do then? So I think I think the first thing to say is you've got to live in the mystery, and you've got to have a theology that allows that space. The moment you start trying to tie it down too neatly, why God doesn't heal, you either end up blaming God or you're blaming the sick person. And in the Bible, it is a paradox. You don't blame the sick person, and you don't blame the suffering people who the tower fell on them, like Jesus says. And you've got to kind of say, on the one hand, God doesn't cause evil. God doesn't delight in evil. But at the same time, there are times where he doesn't remove it. And at the same time, he can bring good and meaning out of it, which doesn't make it in itself good. Yeah. The thing is bad, but you can find good. And those nuances and subtleties are so important. So for me, I rejoice in others' healing. Sometimes I also cry, I'll be honest. Like, sometimes when I hear of someone else being healed, it is that feeling of, oh, why not me? And what do they do? But I just got to kind of talk myself out of that God doesn't heal people because of their worthiness. So we've just got to get out of that mindset. And I really appreciate that others do pray for my healing as well. And I occasionally kind of hope and also pray as well. But for me, I can't live in the hope.
Yeah.
I've got to live in the acceptance. And I think too often the church doesn't realize how emotionally exhausting it is for people who are chronically ill to be offered prayer over a number of years. Some people find it a real gift and love to go up the front for prayer and rejoice in the opportunity. But for me, I find it so hard because there's the disappointment. And I think the crucial thing for me has been to understand that even when you feel exiled, even when you feel like you're in the wilderness, you're alone, and your experience is so different from everyone else's, God has a habit of showing up in the wilderness. He always does.
Yeah.
And there's gold amidst the muck and the thorns. Like, he can bring good.
You speak of thorns and gold.
Yeah, that's the name of my blog. I'm like, yeah.
So guys, get yourselves over to, it's tanyamarlow.com, and it's thorns and gold, isn't it? And check his blog, because you've been writing for a long time. Thank you so much, Tanya.
Thank you so much for having me.